Hello and welcome to this week's review of My Hero Academia. Because there is no episode being broadcast this week, I thought I'd take this opportunity to do a mid-season review. Yes, mathematically speaking, this is not the middle of the season, but there is a break this week, so I thought, why the hell not? Let's reflect on what we've had thus far, and we'll kick off this review, as we always do with these reviews, by talking about the positives, all the things that I've enjoyed thus far, and we kick off with the headline positives. I think that this was a solid first half and a great way to start this season. I feel that it sets the stage for things to come very well, and it gives us deep dives into characters who haven't had that thus far, or at least not in quite some time, in quite a long time. With that said, I just want to point out two things before we get too far into the review. Firstly, I don't know how long this video is going to end up being because this first half of the season has been rather short, and the second thing is that I'm not going to be talking about specific events that have happened this season. If you want to know about my feelings given certain plot threads, certain episodes, you can watch my prior reviews I've done thus far. You can find a playlist with them all on the channel itself. With all of that said, I have to say is that I did feel as though the first half of this season does everything that the first half of a season needs to do. I know that it might sound peculiar for me to praise the mechanics in such a way like this, because this is like praising a car for starting, but you get the idea of it. The truth of the matter is that we are getting into what is the final storyline of this entire series. Sure, there may be a little bit of a cutesy epilogue thing towards the end of all of this, but this is here now. We're here. This is what everything over the past few years has been leading up to, and as such, in order for all of this to work, especially given the sheer length of everything, the pacing of all of this needs to be pitch perfect. There can never be a moment where we get maybe halfway through all of this and think, my god, I can't wait for all of this to end. We can't let ourselves get into a moment where we're feeling mentally exhausted by what we're seeing here. We need to remain geared up and excited for everything that's coming along, and in order to do that, we need to make sure that the pacing I should say, is at the very least decent and able to function. I will admit that the pacing and length of certain events this season has not been to my liking, but that's something I will discuss in the negatives shortly. But as I say, we are getting into the final storyline, the definitive storyline. This is where all of this ends, one way or another, and as such, in this season, we are setting up for stuff and setting up for storylines which will take weeks, if not months, and in some cases might take a whole year, if not more, depending on how this is all paced out to resolve. As such, we need to make sure that the pacing for all of these events is done pitch perfectly. If we're setting up for a little storyline that's going to be resolved in this season, be this by the end of the season or a short little 2 or 3 week thing, then the setup and payoff of it needs to be a lot more immediate, and it needs to be a lot more deliberate. There can be no real ambiguity. There can be some moments of abstract thought, there can be some abstract foreshadowing and the such like, but it can't feel as though it's going to drag all of that out for weeks and months down the line. When it comes to stuff that's longer term, it needs to be in the form of more teases. With the fight between Dabi and Shoto, we have the half-melted statue of All Might, which itself suggests that the fight between them was only half over, and given what we've seen in the final episode thus far of this season, it gives us the very clear hint that the fight between them is not over. With the stuff with the sabotage or potential future sabotage of UA, we had that scene towards the start of this season when we had the henchman saying, "We gotta do this for the boss," or words to that effect, and that was only a mild tease because that's something that might not come into play until maybe the tail end of this season, if not at some point in the next season. Whether or not the stuff with Dabi and Shoto will be resolved by the end of this season, I don't know, but you get the idea. If we're doing something that's supposed to be resolved in the next few weeks, it has to be a lot more focused and it has to be a lot more present. If it's something that's not going to be resolved for weeks, if not months down the line, it needs to have a little bit more of a soft touch to it, so we're not at a point just sat there thinking to ourselves, okay, all of this is neat and that, but when are we going to get back to this? When are we going to get back to that? That thing should be brought back into it. We should be getting back into that. We don't have that. There's certain events which we know aren't going to end up getting resolved till the end of this season, or maybe even the end of the next season, depending again how all this paced out. But we only get that feeling if the way in which it's presented gives us that feeling. I will say is that this first half of the season is fairly unambiguous as to what is happening and where we're going on from here on out. This is a season which it's not exclusively all action, but it is saying to our audience at home, look, a lot of what we're going to end up seeing here is going to be action. There will be some mystery, there will be some character development, and there will be some deeper dives into characters, their motivations, and their history. But for the time being, at least, we're not going to go and have some side storyline where everyone's having a beach episode, everyone's playing baseball, whatever. We know where we are. There is no ambiguity as where we're going with all of this. We might have flashback sequences. We might have recalls of things that have happened in the past. Doing it in that way that only anime and manga can, where they do that, we'll do the show here when it comes to giving us the history of our characters. You know, we don't learn about it weeks in advance, or months or years in advance. We learn it about 5 or 6 minutes before they have their big final confrontation. But hey ho, that's the way that they do things with this kind of narrative, these kind of storylines. But you know, as you say, as I say, you get the idea. This season is pretty much setting out, look, we are in the big final fight right now. Yes, it's not the big final fight, but functionally everything that we're seeing here is the big wrap-up of everything. We're not going to be changing gears and having an episode where our heroes are going to be fighting some new villain group, or they're going to be dealing with some other enigmatic threat. Some other villains and enigmatic threats may come forward, but they're going to be directly tied to whatever All For One's big plot is. And, of course, when we're in this particular half of the season, we are getting it perfectly set out to us that this is pretty much the style of how the narrative is going to be going from here on out. You know, we have an episode or so where it's a bit more scattershot and focused on different groups. Then we'll have a bit more of a deep dive on 1 or 2 groups, and then we'll maybe have an episode which is focused almost exclusively on one particular character. I will admit, I hope that this isn't the shape of things going forward, because I think that the format and structure of this season might get repetitive if we're doing this potentially in a year or so's time. I think that variety is the spice of life here, but as I say, it's been pretty much set out to us here and now that this is the state of things, that we're not going to be having these episodes of pure brevity and levity to just make us, to help keep us engaged and stop ourselves from getting mentally exhausted. Though we'll soon see about all of that. Like I've mentioned in previous reviews, I think the handling of some of the humour and some of the gags in this season has not been done particularly well, but we'll see where all that ends up going. And the things I really did enjoy, to get some of this a little bit more focus, is that I did enjoy getting the deeper dives into characters whom we haven't really seen in great detail, either just never seen them in greater detail or not in a very long time. These stuff with Aoyama and Dabi are the 2 big ones here. Of course, there's been other stuff with Shoto, Ochaku, Toga, Midoriya, and many other characters this season, both old and new, but I feel that what was done with the pair of them was fantastic, and I think that there is still room for them to grow and new things that could be done with them going forward. Like I mentioned previously, the way in which their storylines are being set up, by the way in which it all has been paced out thus far, makes it clear that we're not just going to get a one season done thing with them. We're not just getting a one fight and done thing with them. That we're going to see their characters evolve and grow over how many weeks or months they may still remain within this series. I won't get into fine details as to what I thought about either particular story that we had with them thus far. I think that between the 2 of them, that Dabi's was the best pound for pound, and I think that is the best episode thus far this season. With the stuff with Aoyama, I will be blunt, I can't comment on it in great detail, purely and simply because the reveal of him being the traitor was spoilt for me well in advance. We're talking a good year or 2 in advance, so I can't give an unbiased answer. I think that it was solid, but I wanted more, which itself is not a bad thing, but I think that, again, it's the spoiler thing at the end of the day. I know that for a lot of people, the reveal that he was the traitor was something that really caught them off guard and was really a shocking moment for them. But regrettably, again, I knew about this well in advance, so there was no getting away from it from. But I can't, in wholehearted honesty, just sit here and pretend as though it was some epic great thing for me, or I found it bad, or what have you, because, quite frankly, whatever emotional weight that I should have got hit by it was vastly muted by the fact that some son of a bitch decided to spoil it months, years in advance. Okay, so with a negative tone in my throat, let us move on to talk about the negatives, the things I did not enjoy about this particular season thus far. I'm going to start off with something that may be seen as a bit of a nitpick. It may be seen as a bit too procedural for a review like this, but hey, these are my subjective opinions, so I'll share them with you honestly and truly. I think that having a break come after 9 episodes is weird to me. It really feels as though it should have come after 10 weeks, but this is where we are. Now, there may be a regional reason as to why they've taken the break after 9 weeks instead of after 10 weeks. Maybe there's some kind of event in Japan and it didn't feel like it was in good taste to have an episode this week. Maybe there's a sporting event on. I really don't know. But I'm sure that if anyone has anything to add with that, by all means, leave it in the comment section. I mean, if it is a sensitive point, do discuss it with maturity. But if it isn't, and this is just a break for the sake of having a break, then having after 9 episodes just feels really odd, given the structure of a season like this. Now, let us be honest, let us address the elephant in the room here. This year's season has 21 episodes. That's not a round number, so you can't just do 10 and 10. You're going to have 10 and 11. And I'd rather have 10 now and 11 later, but breaking after 9 means that it's 9 now and 12 later. And there is that part of me that I've alluded to over the course of this review that is worried that by the end of this season, I'm just going to start feeling rather mentally exhausted by all of this, because this is ultimately, whilst it will be paced out and broken up by other things, essentially one big series of action sequences. And those of you who saw my review for last season will know that I didn't like the first half of that season because of just how long all that action stuff was taking on. It felt as though it was time to overstay its welcome and that we were dealing with it for far too long. And there's a part of me that's worried that I'll get to the end of this series and end up saying that, yeah, I was enjoying it up until the point where it felt like watching it was becoming a chore. But we'll see as where all that goes. I will be honest that the sheer fact that it's going to be 9 and 12 doesn't mean automatically that that's going to be the case. I might get to the end of this season and say that, yeah, at the end of the day, it all worked out in the end, but we'll soon see about that. For something a little bit more focused to the actual content of this season, I have to say is that the Star and Stripe and the Traitor arcs were just far too short. Yes, I understand that they were short in the manga. As far as I'm aware, there hasn't been anything that has been cut from them, and if everything has been, then it may be stuff that will be seen at some other point, at some point in the not too distant future. But I have to say is that, you know, in a similar kind of way with the heteromorph cult stuff from the My Villain Academia stuff from a few seasons back, which ended up getting slotted into last season in a kind of awkward way, I will admit, but what I will say is it's really odd that two storylines that are as significant as this, especially the Traitor arc, are just so short that they're both over after only a couple episodes. Yes, they're relatively short in the manga as well, and maybe they ran longer by just the sheer virtue of them being in a different medium, but it just feels really odd to me. Like, the Star and Stripe stuff, ultimately take it or leave it. The stuff with the Traitor stuff, yeah, that should be more significant. The Star and Stripe story arc ultimately hasn't really amounted to much of a muchness. It was just a brief delay in the villain's plans. The Traitor arc stuff is material that really should have been built out a lot more for me. Again, given the limitations that we're working here, we have to treat it just as it is. This will have been about the same length in the manga as it is in the TV series, so then this makes us venture off into that realm of discussing the expectations of television versus the expectations in manga and comic books, and the whole debate between faithful adaptation versus modified adaptation. I know that it's a very sore point for many people, not just anime and manga fans, that there'll be adaptations of a series that you know and you love, and then there'll be stuff that's cut out of it at times for no good real reason, and then it just feels kind of weird and awkward, and of course there's many terrible adaptations out there. And I don't want to sound heady or faux intellectual, but I feel that this does start to cut into the philosophy of the adaptation itself. Should an adaptation be as faithful to the source material as possible, or should it try to elaborate and expand upon things that the source material could not or would not elaborate on for whatever reason? When we talk about the adaptations of manga into anime, it seems from what I have noticed that the writers of the manga are often the showrunners of the TV series, so there is always part in the back of my mind that's just thinking, okay, but is there not something else you wanted to say here? Is there some plot thread or some aspect that you realise long after this went to print that, oh, damn it, I should have done that, and if so, then why not introduce that into it? Now, I can't say as to what the plans may or may not have been for this particular series, and I'm not going to speculate on it, but I will say is that just purely on their own merit, they're just far too short, and maybe a bit of filler here would have helped to pad things out. I don't think you could have really padded out the Star and Stripe stuff, because I think at the end of the day that would have taken away the impact of that character. But look, when going into that arc, you always knew, regardless of whether you had it spoiled for you well in advance like I did or not, that she wasn't going to end up winning it. It was always just a question as to what state that Star and Stripe would be in at the end of it all. But the truth of the matter is that maybe had that storyline been a little bit longer, maybe if we'd seen her do something spectacular with her powers ahead of time, that maybe there would have been a little bit more ambiguity there. Maybe there would have been like a sense of that, okay, maybe she won't win this, but maybe she'll survive it, or she'll deal the villains a crippling blow that they'll never truly recover from, which is what it felt like they were going to do, but in the here and now that doesn't feel like it ultimately is the case, and that whatever contribution that she gave to this ultimately boiled down to, well, they got an extra week to prepare. The Traitor arc stuff, however, is significantly more significant. I know that significantly more significant is a bit redundant, but still, given everything that has happened as a result of Aoyama giving the information to All For One, given the sheer weight of all of that, that shouldn't have been resolved after 3 episodes. Yes, from a character point of view, all of that stuff is going to end up getting dealt with over the coming weeks and months. We're going to see this evolution of Aoyama as a character and as a hero. I'm not saying this because of spoilers, because I don't know much of what's happening from this point on, but let's be honest, this is the part in the story where Aoyama will get his big time to shine. He's going to prove himself as a hero, that he isn't just kind of some snivelling coward, that he can be every bit the hero that he wishes that he could be, and that his friends know he'll be. So we've got that stuff to look forward to coming down the line. It's just that it feels as though it needed a little bit more of the Traitor arc stuff to kind of build it out a little bit more. Maybe there should have been a little more ambiguity, because the Traitor arc stuff up until this moment had been functionally done and dealt with. The Nezu, I think it was a few seasons ago, just said that maybe there isn't a traitor all along, and as far as that was concerned, that just drew a line under all of it. And I feel that if we were to bring the Traitor stuff back into it, there should have been a little more ambiguity to who it might be. There was briefly some ambiguity towards the start of the episode that we learned it was Aoyama, because it made it look like it was going to be the Invisible Girl hero was actually a traitor all along. But we didn't really get much of a build for that to be the case, because almost as soon as we realised that, oh, she's there, we also saw that Aoyama was there, and we realised, oh, it's him. And my final bit of criticism or negative point for this season is that I think that getting into this final battle stuff feels odd. Yes, this isn't the final battle. This is a series of battles which for some characters will be final and definitive. Maybe because they'll pass away, because, you know, that's the way in which we get to in these particular stories. Maybe it's because they turn the corner and become the character they were always meant to be, or purely and simply because they're not going to become relevant for this part on going forward. But regardless, I feel that getting into the final battle, getting into the final storyline feels very abrupt, and I know that this is a sore point for the manga fans, because they too were like, wait, hang on, we're getting into this now? The stuff that's left to resolve here, isn't there? And this does end up leading to this overall feeling that, yes, all of this stuff probably was pre-planned ahead of time. It feels like that plan was brought forward, like a season was cut, and then we're bringing all this stuff forward, so this doesn't quite feel the logical end point that it really should be, even if in a weird kind of way we're getting characters feel as though they are coming to their logical end point in this story. Like I mentioned a couple of weeks back with the fight between Dabi and Shoto. Yeah, as it's clear now, that wasn't the big final confrontation between the two of them, but I'd have been perfectly accepting of that being the final confrontation between the two of them because of how well it was put together and paced. But, you know, we're starting to get lost in the reads a little bit here. I think that having one season centered around a series of fight sequences is one thing, but the truth of the matter is that we're looking at another season after this, and there's a good chance this might even go to 3 seasons. I'll grant you that if that's the case, that third and final season will be significantly shorter. Like, they can't bring that then out to 20 episodes. It might be a 15-episode thing, and then it would just kind of bookend the series. Like, we started out with Season 1, which was only about 10 episodes long, and then we're going to end with a 10-episode thing. We'll soon see about how that ends up going together. I will say is that thus far, I am satisfied as to how the pacing of all of this is going, but there is a part of me that is feeling that it could overstay its welcome, because at a certain point, every single episode is just going to boiling down to scenes of cliched anime action happening in ruined cities, and I fear that there's going to be a lot of comparisons drawn between this and I believe it's pronounced Jujutsu Kaisen, which is that big series that everyone loves and's been raving about, and I saw the most recent season of that where they had their big epic fight sequence in a soon-to-be ruined city, and I'll be honest, I think comparing the two series is apples to oranges, because at the end of the day, they're going from two very different directions, and the fact that people are actually making the comparisons to them just blows my fucking mind, but that's a rant for another time. But after that particular season, I felt that, okay, that particular series has only got one more series left in it. If that series is still going for another 2 or 3 series, I'm going to blow my frigging mind, because how the hell can you have anything after that point? And there's a part of me that's worried that I'll get a certain feeling at some point during this particular series, that maybe at some point in this season it's a case of, okay, so now's the moment the big final battle should begin. Or now this is the big moment that this character should have their final battle with this character. And if it then gets dragged out for another week or another month, it's going to feel like it's taking the piss. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know how all this is going to hand together. There is a lot of ambiguity there. And with that said, let us pivot into the overview. And I have to say is that this is a very solid first half. I will admit that I do think it's lacking a certain degree of substance, bar 2 episodes which had it in droves. But there is nothing here that's making alarm bells ring for me. There is not this feeling of constant misery that I fear that I'll be getting into. There is still part of me, however, that is worried that by the end of this series, I'm going to feel as exhausted at best as I was at the end of the first half of the previous season, or at worst, just as exhausted as I was after the most recent season of Jujutsu Kaisen, where I just never wanted to watch that fucking program ever again, just how burnt out that I was from it. But hey, that's from me binge watching it. Maybe if I watch it in a weekly basis, it wouldn't have been so bad. But with all that said, you've heard my thoughts. Now it's time to get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner, just before I have lunch. Whoa! Okay, time for Comment Corner. Now, a quick disclaimer, because I didn't realise at the time I did last week's episode that there wasn't going to be an episode this week, I didn't ask anyone about their thoughts and feelings about what they thought about this season thus far. Of course, let me know what you thought about the season thus far down below. You will be read out in a future video, so this is mostly views and reflections of the previous episode. So we'll kick off, as we always do, seemingly with all these reviews, by kicking off with Big X1, who says, "This was an enjoyable one, but I think too much was happening, but I am looking forward to next week's episode." This goes referring to last week's episode, and yeah, there isn't an episode this week, obviously, because we're doing this. I'm happy that they enjoyed last week's episode. I enjoyed it quite a bit as well. But, you know, I am seemingly looking for a lot more to next week's episode, when it looks like we're going to have a bit more of a deep dive into Endeavour, into how they became more of the person that they are. But we'll soon see where all that's going to end up going. And our next comment comes from Scott TV Gamer, who says, "Not my favourite of the season, but it's a great episode nonetheless. Next episode should have one of the more anticipated moments in the entire arc. So much I actually recommend skipping the new opening in case it spoils them anything about it, but you do you." Thank you for your comment, and thank you for your warning. We'll see where all that goes. I try to skip the openings when it comes to My Hero Academia, because let's be honest, anime openings do tend to spoil a fair few things. Like, it's okay if they do it in an abstract way, if they do it in a slightly thematic way, but sometimes it kind of just feels like a case of, yeah, they are almost literally saying what's going to happen. Speaking of Jujutsu Kaisen, which I mentioned previously, I think the openings for that show have at times been really clever and really creative, and some really subversive things, which I might well discuss at one point in the not too distant future. My Hero Academia and similar of the programs, well, yeah, I may well skip the intro for the next half of the season. But anyway, we'll soon see where all that goes. Thank you for your comments. Leave a comment down below, and you will be read out in a future video between then. And I'll say thank you all for listening, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!